You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with Susie Boniface for the moment, hoping to be joined later on by Freddie Gray. And we hope that they'll be with us both from now until just before midnight. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. And after the Home Secretary's win in the court case over sending migrants to Rwanda, The Times has the news of Prince Charles that the process is appalling. The Daily Mail has the same lead story. The Eye leads with what it calls a new plot by Tory rebels to oust Boris Johnson using the same methods that were employed by his supporters to remove Theresa May in 2019. Meanwhile, Mr Johnson is on the front of The Telegraph with a story about his plans to unveil a new strategy to grow food for Britain to be announced next week. The Financial Times says Boris Johnson is to scrap plans for taxes on salt and sugar in food in order to keep right-wing MPs on his side during his leadership difficulties. The Guardian leads on that too, with critics calling it a missed opportunity. The Mirror claims an exclusive with news that Stuart Campbell, the killer of schoolgirl Danielle Jones in 2001, is asking for parole, even though he's never revealed where her body is. The Express leads with a boom in staycations as travel misery puts people off going abroad. The Sun has news that Prince Charles and Camilla are to host an episode of Strictly Come Dancing from the Palace. While the Star leads with Britney Spears' ex-husband gatecrashing her wedding. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Susie Boniface, columnist at the Daily Mirror, to take us through the papers. You're all on your lonesome tonight, but I know that you're more than capable, Susie. Let's start.
Billing for double.
Let's start with the Times. And this very interesting story, Prince Charles has made comment, apparently, in private, that he's appalled by the government's Rwanda policy.
Yeah, these kind of stories are always really fascinating. So, constitutionally, the royals aren't supposed to say anything about government policy. They're not supposed to express an opinion. It's not what we have royals for anymore. The last time one of them expressed an opinion, we chopped off his head, and the whole deal with getting them back in again. I mean, said we won't chop off your heads anymore so long as you keep your mouths shut. So they're not supposed to do this. However, there are times, I am sure, that various members of the royal family have let it be known, to nick a phrase, that they do or don't like something in particular that's happening in public. I'm pretty certain I can remember a long time ago, the Queen was said to have been less than chuffed with some of Margaret Thatcher's social policies. And perhaps, although those things may be true, they may genuinely not like or do like a particular policy. The fact that it comes out is the interesting thing, because the royal family don't sit there and just sort of gas at the bus stop and get overheard by other people. They're surrounded by their employees, and they're surrounded by friends who are their friends because they don't talk. So if we have heard something they have genuinely said, then someone somewhere in that chain wants us to know that they don't like or do like this particular policy. So there's always loads of thinking around corners to do with a royal story like this as to how it came out and who really is the sort of the controlling mind behind it, if you like.
And do you think it might be the prince himself that wants us to know?
I don't think it will do an awful lot of damage to the Prince of Wales to be mostly in tune with public opinion in the UK, which is pretty much against the Rwanda policy as a broad brushstroke. It could also perhaps help those in government if it is known that they're being, contested somehow by the privileged elite. Because those, the people, the cultural war that we're fighting here with the Rwanda policy is the government talking to the pro-Brexit white working class on the one hand, and sort of the royals and trying to put the liberals and the elite and the woke and all the other people on the other side and have this big argument about Rwanda. And so it may suit some people in government to say, well, look, we're being held back. There's the lawyers on the one hand, there's Prince of Wales on the other, sticking his nose in. How dare he? So it's the kind of thing that just spreads all this out a bit further and sort of it can make both sides positive or negative, put it that way. It can help both sides to have this kind of thing come out. But it's not probably going to help the general sort of, the story of the nation, the conversation that we need to have about the Rwanda policy and asylum seekers and so on is not assisting that at all, because it will just come down to an emotional response. Do we or don't we agree with Prince Charles? And we don't actually have a proper discussion either about the Constitution or about asylum seekers.
Let us bring Freddie Gray in now, who joins us. Good to see you, Freddie. Susie's cheering there because you can take some of the...
Better late than never.
My invoice has been cut in half. Thanks, Fred.
Freddie, as you've probably heard some of what we've been talking about, the Times, we're looking at the Times at the moment, and it's also on the front of the Daily Mail, but Prince Charles commenting in private, but being quoted by an unnamed source that he's finding the whole Rwanda policy appalling. What's interesting, though, is that Clarence House haven't denied that he's opposed to the policy, but they've insisted that he hasn't tried to influence the government.
Well, this is what a lot of sort of royal enthusiasts have dreaded for a long time about as Her Majesty sort of moves into full retirement and Prince Charles takes over more fully, that we're going to get these stories more and more. And it seems like Clarence House, under his direction, does cultivate and does get involved. And the monarchy under him will be more political, more involved in stories. And I think that's a recipe for disaster for the royal family, because the rights and wrongs of this story aside, the reason the Queen was such a big success, has been such a big success, is because she has successfully stayed out of politics. Prince Charles seems unable to do that. And so I think we'll see a lot more of this in the years to come, and it won't be good for the monarchy.
Although in a documentary, the one marking his 70th birthday in 2018, he said he would no longer make public interventions on subjects once he was clean, declaring, "I'm not that stupid." So in the meantime, we find that he's travelling to Kigali for the heads of government meeting. It is an embarrassing situation for him, and that's probably why he's speaking out now, although Boris Johnson wanted this flight to go ahead before that very heads of government meeting takes place in Kigali, Susie.
Yeah, and the fundamental issue there, what perhaps he didn't kind of appreciate that when he was given that interview at the age of 70, is that he's taking on the role of being a king. So he's taking on lots of the constitutional duties of the head of state, and therefore is not able to express these opinions publicly. And yet, he still has that hinterland, as Freddie said. We do still know this about him. But we also know, for example, the head of state has also said something not a million miles away. It was only National Holocaust Memorial Day not long ago, and there was a luncheon for survivors of genocides, Rwanda, Bosnia, and the World War II genocide. And the Queen sent them all a letter and said, "Thank you for coming to my country and enriching it. And we're glad you made us your home." That's not quite the same political statement as saying the Rwanda policy is appalling, but it is very definitely showing that the royal family has perhaps a slightly different attitude towards asylum seekers than some of Boris Johnson's core voters do. And perhaps that's linked to the fact that Prince Philip was himself an asylum seeker.
Interesting analysis there. Let us move on to a different story now, the FT weekend. And this story on the front page suggesting that the government, Boris Johnson and his government, are going to drop the recommendation of a sugar and salt tax. Freddie.
Well, there's a lot of talk in Tory circles about how Boris Johnson is going to win back the free market right of the party, the bit of the party that was very disappointed by lockdowns, very disappointed about the way the government spending has grown, is not so keen on protecting the NHS as the sort of Johnson factions in the party. And so this story, I think, speaks to an attempt by Number 10 to appease those, if you like, rabid free marketeers in the party who aren't happy with a lot of the more high tax, anti-business policies that this administration pursued. So I think this story speaks to that.
Yeah, suggesting that this latest example of the Johnson government backing away from policies perceived as unconservative or anti-business. Meanwhile, Susie, The Guardian is suggesting that it's a huge missed opportunity.
Yeah, and I think we're going to see more of this as the next sort of months and maybe a year or so unfolds, because we've got a prime minister now who, whatever you think of him, is weakened in his position within the party. I was in his office seeing him on Wednesday with a group of nuclear test veterans, asking him to deliver justice and recognition for them with a mirror. And I very much doubt we would probably have been in that room if his position was not as weak as it is now. He's in that sort of spot where he really has to try to make as many friends on all sides as possible. So we will see policies which were previously promised dropped because of pressure, and we will see policies that have previously been dropped being reinvigorated again because of pressure. Sometimes when you have a weak leader, it means that people that are around them that are a bit stronger perhaps can sort of, horse trade and get some things done the way they want them and move the leader in their direction. Other times it means that the leader just has to try to please everybody in all directions at once and ends up pleasing nobody. Where this will or will not work is whether the Prime Minister and his team are successful in choosing the right policies to give way on and the right things to do to buy those favours back, and whether or not that strengthens his government to continue in the long term.
I'm going to move on, because of time, Freddie, to the Express and the surge in staycations that apparently is happening. Rush for last-minute staycation bookings because of flight misery. International travel is not looking so attractive at the moment.
Well, I mean, I know I'm not going anywhere this summer. I fully set on the Isle of Wight is our family destination. And a lot of people I know have made the same decision. They've decided to cancel plans to go abroad. It's just not worth it. The airports are chaotic. The airlines have not got their act sorted. And it's shambles at all ends. And the government seems to think, maybe bringing in the army might sort it out. That seems to be the government solution to any administrative problem or legislative infrastructure problem, is to talk about bringing in the army. They haven't got a handle on it. It's a real problem. It's going to be a problem of the summer. And so that's why a lot of people are staying within these borders.
But Susie, for the travel industry, I mean, this is a major headache. They've just started opening up. I mean, it's the first time people are thinking about real travel, international travel, following the pandemic. This is really bad news for them.
Yeah, so some people, of course, will have booked trips which got postponed and rolled over, and they finally now are, coming into being, and they can't get cancelled anymore and repaid on insurance and stuff like that, and then it becomes impossible to actually take the holiday. At the same time, they don't have enough staff back in at the travel companies because they busily fired everybody. Far too much enthusiasm during the pandemic. And on top of that, we've got sudden massive hikes in the cost of fuel. So the costs of these things are going up as well. Freddie's going to the Isle of Wight. I haven't been since I was a kid because the cost of getting there is so extortionate. So I'm going to have to stop in Dorset this year. But again, that was I can't get across the river, the sea. It's because the business of going on holiday and having this huge production, especially when you have a young family, the idea of going through an airport when you have small children and maybe potentially being stuck in it for hours at a time is so unbearably painful that many, many people are going to be trying to do something else. Hopefully that will mean that some of the cost of holidaying at home comes down as well, particularly the Isle of Wight ferry, please. Anyone's listening?
Welcome back. You're watching the Press Preview. Still with me, Susie Boniface and Freddie Gray. Welcome back. Let us have a look at the Daily Telegraph. And this is sounds like a warning from the Education Secretary, Nadine Zahawi, that schools shouldn't use the rail strikes as an excuse to return to remote learning. Freddie?
Well, this is another theme that's been going on around these strikes, is a sense in the government that not just schools, but other parts of the government, particularly the civil service again, are just finding more and more excuses to do remote working. And I think this is going to be a theme for this administration in the year ahead. It's a sort of war on remote working, a war on stay-at-home culture. But it's one they've got to wage very carefully because, of course, they were the architects of lockdown. So I think you're going to see this fight happening not just with schools, but across various sectors.
Although, Susie, remote learning for schools is by far not an easy option. It's actually probably more difficult than teaching in person.
It is, yeah. I teach at a university in London, and it's definitely more difficult. So it's by no means a cop-out, despite the fact that some people like to say that it is. But the issue here within this article really is that the unions are warning there comes a point you don't have blanket car ownership in this country, and with fuel prices and inflation the way it is, it's very easy to get to the point where someone can't afford to drive their car or has to sell their car or can't afford to fix their car. And so therefore, if you can't get the train to go to work, there becomes a point where what they're calling a critical mass, you just don't have quite enough teachers to run the school. And when you get to that point, the people who run the school, the head teacher, they have to make a decision in the interest of everybody's safety to say, well, we're just not going to be able to open the school today. And that would be the same in any walk of life. You know, if you wanted to go to the supermarket and the manager of the supermarket found that only 2% of his staff are coming in that day, he can't really safely operate the supermarket because they could get swamped by people coming in and just walking off with stuff on the shelves without bothering to go through the tills. So the supermarket would close. So this is the problem with a rail strike. As soon as if your response to a strike is to blame the strikers for daring to do it, then your response to the effects of all the strike that are going to sort of grow around it has to be to blame those, or blame the schools for closing, blame the rain for falling, blame this for not going the way I wanted it to. The fundamental issue why we're going to a strike is because the negotiations between the government and the unions have completely failed, and the two sides have stopped speaking. And if you want to avoid all these consequences for schools and everything else, the thing to do is to talk.
Well, the strikes may still not go ahead, although that looks unlikely, but parents are having contingency plans, planning for their children to stay with friends who live close to school to make sure they can travel in for GCSEs and A-levels, which is very important. Final story, Freddie, this is in the Express, apparently the perfect formula for G&T. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I'm not a great enthusiast of gin tonics, particularly drinking them out if you're in a pub or whatever, mainly because of, if you can see in the picture there, those types of glasses, I hate those glasses. I don't know why I have such strong aversion to them. But people you sort of drown your gin and tonic in enormous amounts of tonic, and then it goes flat by the time you get to the end. So I'm not a big fan. I like a small... the huge amount of ice, it's by the end it doesn't taste of anything, and I think the gin craze has been going on for too long. I think it's time we found another spirit to wreck our livers with.
Susie, what is the perfect formula though, or does it not actually give it?
Well, I agree with Freddie. The perfect formula is not to have one of these stupid glasses the size of a soup bowl and fill it full of ice, which, by the way, should not cost £1,000 for a glass, despite what some pubs will charge you for. But the formula here for a perfect gin and tonic, they say, is you have to pour it at a certain temperature. You don't stir it too much because you lose the fizz in your tonic. But the really offensive thing I find here, and I like a gin and tonic, okay? I'm quite happy with gin, I'm quite happy with tonic. I like it in a nice, reasonable glass at 5 o'clock in the evening because that's a civilised human being. What I don't like is in here they're saying that the only way to really appreciate the complex flavours in gin is that you don't put a lemon or a lime in it. You should be adding mango and pine, they say, which I think, I'm sorry, I want to call the police. There's something wrong with that.
Somebody call the gin police. Susie and Freddie, thank you very much for taking us through the papers.